Hello, here I am making another Stump the Professor video. This is for the team, Can You Hear Us Now? And team, can you hear us now? We have three great questions and really diving into some really great application of the things we've been working on this term. I can't wait to get into it. Just remembering I don't have all the answers. I just have a response, and this is an attempt to create a dialogue or a chance to be in the moment with the class. And I really appreciate the questions and the chance to respond. So here I go. Let's see what I can get going here. The first one is, how can the principles of emotional intelligence be effectively integrated into crisis communication strategies? So, what we're talking about, how can the principles of emotional intelligence be effectively integrated into crisis communication strategies? Well, emotional intelligence should be integrated into all aspects of your communication. And then when crisis hits, dun dun dun, as it often does, now you can already be in the practice of using these tools. Let's talk about emotional intelligence, or the EI. Um, One thing to kind of just think about in context is that this was developed by Daniel Goleman, the language of emotional intelligence, in the mid 1990s. And an article, what makes up a leader, or leadership, something like this, that was put out by the Harvard Business Review, and it was like fire, and it just took off in the worlds of business, and it started being applied in all sorts of situations. And so it's all really relevant. I mean, emotional intelligence is about self awareness, it's about emotional or self-regulation, knowing how to make choices, being in control of those choices, including the choice of how to be motivated, self-motivated or productive. It's also the skills around empathy and cooperation and networking and relationship building. It's got all these components to it, which are, when I teach communication competency, it really mirrors what we already know about what it means to be a competent communicator, an ethical communicator. I think it's right in there. So, emotional intelligence, um, it's a little out of date, and it's been really overused in the business lexicons environment specifically. And I think that is worth mentioning, that if you use the words emotional intelligence, I think it often gets slapped on all these things without any depth or nuance or pointing to specific. It's just like this thing label that's slapped on. But are you really getting into the weeds of behavior and moments that that theory is really trying to build on? When we talk about today, I wanted to make sure that I have some notes here that I want to I want to um, think about a more current trends with the ideas. And I bring it up a lot in my class. My class is really built on more current ideas around this, building on these traditions of emotional intelligence. And I talk a lot about neuroscience, and the conversations around neuroscience are absolutely amazing right now. And there's still a lot more happening in this field, but as soon as you have a better understanding of the different the reasoning parts of the brain versus the amygdala and amygdala hijacks, and what does it mean to be emotionally flooded? Do you know how to go to a flooded cortisol adrenaline response to a more regulated response, which is, 101 emotional intelligence, EI. But when you put it in the language of neuroscience and knowing what breathing, what it really means to do a breath work exercise to get into a more regulated, stabilized state? Do you understand how light and eye movement are attached to your ability to be in an agitated adrenaline state versus a more um, current being in the now state? So these integrating neuroscience into an application of understanding EI is much more current. It's a current trend, and it's very compelling. The research and science that we can learn from it. Okay. Another thing is this term psychological safety or safe space. And other terms that feel slightly out of date, and we want to create some more better understanding in the business, in more current understanding. I put up a video from Amy Edmondson, who is wonderful about this idea of inclusive leadership, and which doesn't mean you have manager, supervisor, anything like that. It just means that you understand how to do relationshiping as part of the skills of team building and problem solving and adding in other people's expertise. We want to think about that. And this leads into another question by this team that I want to make sure that I address, but I'm going to put a pin in that one for now. The other things about more current trends with this idea of emotional intelligence is understanding well-being and burnout. And we have a whole module in this organizational communication class on burnout. Of course, it's at the end of the term. I'm so sorry, at the end of spring term where you're probably burned out and you like, oh my God, I can't read about burnout when I actually have burnout. And I totally appreciate that. I 100% appreciate that. I do want to, in this response to this question about emotional intelligence for uh, understanding, because we want to address this so that when crisis happens, if you have not addressed how you're just on a daily basis dealing with burnout, and then crisis comes, this is when crisis becomes chaos instead of a situation to solve. So I think the pandemic really spotlighted our conversations around burnout in a new way. And a lot of that was because we went into remote works and the spaces blurred between when is work and when am I home, because we had a huge component slice of the population that was working from home. Definitely not our first responders, not people who had to keep stores open and grocery stores. And we found out that our frontline workers in the pandemic showed essential work in a completely different way. But some of us were starting to work from home a lot more, and it spotlighted this idea of burnout. Well, as much as the pandemic uh, highlighted it, it also was contributing to it because of these blurred spaces. When do I stop working? When do I start working? What are things you do to create if you have to work and as a student you're working at home? Uh, and how are you breaking off? I mean, these are really important conversations. And this is when we talk about what is emotional intelligence. This is the idea of identifying how you are interacting with space. So, like, this is an online asynchronous class. You have to do team meetings and record them. You have to make videos and post them. I'm grading your team meetings. Watching those. I'm watching your video presentations and I'm making video presentations and I'm feeling it too, of course. And then get off work, you get off your computers. And what do? Often we start engaging in social media and we have these other screens. So your work is a screen, and then all of a sudden Your decompression time is a screen. And then all of a sudden, I'm going to go turn on the TV and relax and chill and binge watch a show for fun. And now you're in front of another screen. I'm going to go get online and game with my friends. And now you're on another screen. Like, this is burnout in a way we have never really considered. And as a human species, we're already up to the brim with light exposure on our eyes in this new way. How are you turning things off and not getting light like this right into your eyes from all of these screens? And when we're constantly on screens and we're watching a YouTube video and we're watching this and this and this and this, we're filling up with music, we're filling up with movies, we're filling up with games. Oh my God, I'm just feeling a little stressed out even talking about it. It creates what's called an agitated boredom. And I think I wrote about this in one of the modules when we talked about time. As soon as you're in an agitated state and you turn off, your agitated state feels like that's an emergency and it wants to turn things back on. But if you can think of an agitated state of boredom, that you kind of have to ride that painful wave and get past it to what we call slow boredom. This is like going fishing, right? Or going for a walk with no, and just being in the forest with no AirPods and just taking note of how the forest floor feels on the path under our feet, taking note of how the light is filtering through the canopy of the trees. What are the sounds that we hear, even the sounds of our own steps that we are making, or the sound of rustling, birds, animal life. These things is what slow boredom should be. And as soon as we can get into these spaces, it's not easy. Maybe you do it through art or journaling and not even sure what you're writing and just allowing flow. You now are in a more restful, slow boredom state. This is where innovation happens and a thought might crop up and creativity lives in these spaces. These are very valuable spaces, and they are human spaces that we need to allow our humanness to be in. They are not productive. They are productive, but they're not productivity in the way defined by the performance of work. Often supervisors feel like, oh, look at, I need everyone to perform work and be in this franticness. And we aren't, that shuts down emotional intelligence. It shut down creativity and our ability to do emotional regulation. Other current trends is this trust, which we are, and vulnerability, and influential voices like Brené Brown and Rachel Botsman is another current one in the space of trust that are worth noting, that are changing how we think about emotional intelligence. So I wanted to put that bee in your bonnet about this really interesting question as it comes up. All right, let's get to the next one from Can You Hear Us Now, team? Question number 2. Are there times we intentionally enter the Cynefin domain, more specifically, the unordered sectors? So, uh, yes, okay, so I definitely answered a, an a element of this question when I talked to, who was that one that I think the creative cool communicators video. Yes. Kit um asked about the complicated domain. There was a question about chaos. I'm just trying to find the question on chaos. Uh, that showed up. I think, oh, the think tank asked the question about Is it ever intentional to move your team into chaotic spaces? So I feel like this team needs to go listen to the think tank answer, which was the first question. So you could tune in for that one. But to answer the way you're asking it here, intentionally, the connect, yes, we definitely see leaders for advantageous reasons moving into chaos on purpose. Um, and and complex is definitely to move into complex is when we have to move into complex to understand the chaos or when something went wrong, because you can never know it in true time. It's a retrospective way of looking at um, a, a, a chaotic or a situation where we didn't know the answer. You want to create a task force way. And you may never really understand what happened in a specific situation, but it's only through this complex sense making structure. So we might purposefully move over there to problem solve on something that happened in retrospect. My God, for a second, I thought I wasn't recording. I'm so glad I was because I was like, oh, I'm going to have to start all over. Sorry, I just had a moment of panic. Okay, I'm back. I'm back. Team. Yeah, I think the Cynefin domain is about having more intention in the way we're approaching situations, but it is not linear. So if you're thinking about it in a linear way, it Cynefin is for us to think about things in non-linear spaces and have more intention in that. That's really hard to do when we want a lot more. I like predictability. I need predictability. When things are unpredictable, I have to reassess everything. But we want to be able to move through unordered states with more intention, uh, and ordered states, we need intention as well. I hope that answers the question for you all. How can the last question, the third question, how can leaders train teams to recognize complexity before it happens, before a crisis happens, to avoid complacency before hitting a cliff of chaos? Okay, I think you're using the word complexity a little differently than the way Cynefin theory uses complexity. How can leaders train teams to recognize complexity before crisis happens and to avoid complacency before hitting it? So here's how I think about that question. I think if you want your team to stay awake to uh, complexity in solving problems is really understanding in ordered states, do you have a pattern of feedback loops? So we're talking about, uh, sorry, I'm just thinking for a second. So we want to think about feedback loops and I have a message that popped in and got my attention, but I'm waiting for a call. So I'm just going to look at it. Uh, yes, I do. I'm going to pause this talk. Hold on a second. Thank you for that. My apologies. I was waiting for a really important note. So I got that solved. Okay. So when we talk about feedback loops and getting your team used to it, you're trying to normalize ambiguity. You're trying to normalize sense making as part of a patterned response that you do on the ordered side. So that means, like, when you're in a meeting with your team, uh, are you just stopping the conversation at what you already know? Or are you asking your team, what are you noticing? Is there something we're not considering? Are you open to these things? Even if you can't address it in the moment, are you recording and normalizing feedback loops and different perspective checking in the ordered state? And when you create that, you're trying to stay awake to the complexity of the situation. And when you do that, you might be able to catch things instead of forcing it, like I'm going to force it into the rigidity of this way that we've always done it. Uh, are we, that will really tip you over into, that'll tip your whole team into chaos. And then we might see other things bubbling up because you haven't really trained the team to have uh, conversations around the unknown. So we want a feedback loop that is allows, and maybe a team will say, no, I think we addressed everything. Great. But you ask the question and you keep asking the question and you reward people noticing them, um, of owning up to mistakes. You allow people in the team to have a new idea that needs to be considered and a process for that. Uh, Actually, there's a really great example. Oh, I do have a good example for this. I was really hoping to have an example. Maybe that pause helped for a second. And that's there's a podcast that it was a radio show. Now it's a podcast, This American Life, that has a really good episode about uh, the difference between a car company in the United States versus a car company in Japan. I think they were both the same plant, but the collective culture of Japan was different than the individual culture being driven in the organization here in the United States. And this is from a while ago, like this research and understanding is, you know, decades ago at this point. But Daniel Pink also writes in about it in, which book does he write about it in? I think Motivation, in his Motivation. And one of the things that they really say is like on the Japanese team, they have their assembly line. Everyone has one thing that they're supposed to do on their line to build their car. And I'm really good. I'm really flubbing this up. If anyone's out there, you probably know the exact example because it's a really famous one, and I'm probably flubbing it up. But the the power plant in Japan, an individual person on a line could stop the line and say, actually, I have a tool that I think would work better than the way we're doing it. And it would be management would allow for that feedback loop, a system approach, and try a new and have a new tool even made or used and see how it would work and it would be allowed for a processing of an individual to make something more efficient. That's what I mean by a feedback loop being allowed in it. Now, if you're more in, maybe you're not on an assembly line and there's not an exact tool, but someone might have an idea. How are you allowing for that? Is there room for that? I also talked about this in another answers to another team. I think the Wonder Women team asked a question that this kind of has a sub point in there as well. Okay. How can leaders, I just want to make sure I got through the question. How can leaders train teams to recognize complexity before a crisis happens and avoid complacency before? Well, that's how you do it. Um, are you just in the motions and quick to get on to the next task, or are you allowing room for perception checking? When you recognize that systems are complex, which is how I think you're using the complex word, because when we're in the complex domain, we can't always know until we're in retrospect of a problem. But if you recognize the system is already complex as it exists, even in an ordered system, you're allowing for feedback loops, you're allowing for different perspectives, and the goal in an ordered system is not consensus. You want to make room for more of a consistency or a coherence of ideas rather than consensus building. Consensus building is where you get into trouble easily. Not that there isn't places for consensus. We need that. We also need consensus building, but that's a very specific thing for a specific situation. And it's usually around conflict when we need a certain amount of buy-in. And true consensus is going to take years, I think, or an incredible amount of hours spent on it. It can't be like, oh, we have an idea. What do everyone think? Everyone raise their hand if you agree, and everyone agrees. You might have everyone raise their hand, but that may not mean you have true consensus. You might have tipped into groupthink because of this agitated place of time driving decision making instead of true allowing for true innovation. Oh my God, I stumbled around with that and I had this weird awkward pause where I checked my phone. I hope this video is okay. Can you hear us now? I look forward to your responses. Talk to you all later. Bye.